song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we will ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. The name Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you now. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me this right now. You say, build my life, will build my life upon your love. It is my firm foundation. I will put my trust in you, Lord. Sing, I will build and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you, Lord, and I will not be shaken. I will not be moved. And in the depths or at the heights, you seek me out like a treasured prize. A love so deep and powerful, I come to find it's inexhaustible, and it never runs out on me. And I know it never will, and it never stops chasing me. And I know it never will, for I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. Oh, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. Like a river rushing or a fountain flowing, I've seen the grace that never stops pursuing. It's a love so grandeur, exceeding goodness, and it's taking captive every lofty hindrance, and it never runs out on me. And I know it never will, and it never stops chasing me. And I know it never will. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. Oh, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. He's my faithful champion. He's my faithful champion. You've seen me through the valley, lead me up the mountain. You're You're my faithful champion. You've taken every burden, lifted every worry. You're the hope that lifts my head. Me through the valley, you lead me up the mountain. You're my faithful champion. You've taken every burden, lifted every worry. You're the hope that lifts my head. Oh, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. Oh, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. And it never stops chasing me, and I know it never will. And he never stops chasing me, and I know it never will. For I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. For I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. For I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. For I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, in the land of the living. He's my faithful champion. He's my faithful champion. He's my faithful champion. My faithful champion. He's my faithful champion. And you see me through the valley, lead me up the mountain. He's a faithful champion. He's lifted every burden, he's lifted every worry. He's the hope that lifts my head. He's the hope that lifts my head. My head. He's the lifter of my head. He's the lifter of my head. He's the lifter of my head. The lifter of my head.
Good morning, Living Waters. Thanks for being with us today from wherever you are. We just want you to know that we are praying for you and that we miss being together with you. But our continued prayer is that you would be thriving wherever you are and however you're processing through this time. Remember that you are not alone, that we are in this together. We are going to get through this together. We have to continue to look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, that in this time that we cannot take our eyes off of him. And we talked about that last week in John chapter 8, that we are all in a storm. And it is so tempting to look at the wind and the waves that are around us, taking our eyes off of Jesus, and we can begin to sink into all the stuff that's going on around us. But our encouragement and our challenge is keeping our eyes on Jesus. And when we get pulled away into the stuff that's around us and we start to sink in, that we are quick to cry out to him, that he lifts us up and he puts us into places. And so we're believing that for individuals, for families, for marriages, that he is using this time to refine us, to reset us, and to put us into places of influence, and to put us into places where we can have a massive impact and where your life and your voice matters. And that's what we believe in. We're so thankful for this church and the incredible people that we get to do life with and walk this out with. But we're also praying for this whole thing to come to an end and for everything to begin to shift, but not back to normal, but back to a new place where Jesus has been able to refine us through this time. We're going to continue looking at the miracles of Jesus. And this morning we're looking at John chapter 9, where Jesus heals a man who was blind from birth. And we're looking at the miracles of Jesus to believe in him, and that's what is stated in John 20, but also to remind us as a people that we are called to walk in the supernatural, that we are called to be people of the miraculous. And so as we're looking for solutions and pathways out of this place that we find ourselves in right now as a culture and as a church and as individuals, that we are expectant that God is behind us. And as we proclaim the goodness of Jesus and the gospel of Jesus, that the miraculous and all of heaven is behind us, looking to show up and show himself strong on behalf of us as we stand in him, as we invite peace and hope to not only be made manifest in our heart, but to be made manifest through our lives. Let's be the most joy-filled, hope-filled, solution-focused, Jesus-centered people that we can be through this. And so let's allow John chapter 9 to encourage us today. If you want to turn in your Bibles to John 9, I want to tell you a quick story. The other night, Kate and I were in bed, and it was about 11:30, and our kids were all in bed, and we heard Ezra get up, go to the bathroom, and I didn't notice that if he went back into his room. I assumed he went back in his room. About 5-10 minutes later, we hear a child crying, and it's somewhere in the house, and we're listening to this child crying, and we have some family that's staying with us, and many of you know we live in community, and so we're thinking, is this someone else's child? Why is there a child downstairs crying? And so we're listening, and then we're trying to figure out, somebody should go and figure out what's going on with this baby or with this child, and thinking it was somebody else's. And then we heard this very recognizable voice. And if you guys know your kids and how they call out to you, and it was like, "Mom," and you could hear this fear in its voice, in the child's voice. And so and Kate goes, "I think that's Ezra." And Ezra's our youngest boy. We have 3 boys and a little girl, and he's our youngest son. And she goes, "I think that's Ezra." And so we jump out of bed. I throw on shorts. I'm running around the house. I go downstairs, and I find him down in our family room, all the way to a little office that Kate and I have that we share at the house. And he had somehow sleptwalked down through the house, down flights of stairs, all the way through into that office. And he was sitting in there crying, scared to death because he had not being able to see, and he was sleeping, and he kind of woke up in that room. And so I scooped him up and I brought him back upstairs and got him all situated. And it's one of those moments where as a parent you feel terrible because I didn't know it was him. I didn't know he was down there. How long was he down there? I was checking on him the next day, and I was like, "Are you okay? What happened?" And we're talking through it. And he was like, "Dad, your chest felt so good when you scooped me up." And I was like, that was just one of those moments where as a father, I'm reminded of the goodness of God too, of that presence of the Father coming in and rescuing him and being there for him and carrying him upstairs so that he could be comforted and get back to sleep. But it made me think about this as I'm looking at this miracle of the blind man seeing, and how there's so many spiritual parallels and analogies that we can pull from it, and how our body can function, how Ezra's body was able to function. He was able to walk down through the house, navigate who knows how many obstacles, but he couldn't see anything. It was all muscle memory, and it was his eyes were open and he could see, but he wasn't aware and wasn't perceiving what he could see. And that's the amazing thing that what our physical bodies can do. But in this story we're going to look at, there's a spiritual parallels that we can be functioning through life. Just like Ezra was moving about the house, we can be functioning in our everyday lives and going through the motions. But are we really perceiving the things that are going on around us? Are we really seeing the deeper things that God is doing and the deeper things that are happening in and around our life? Or are we sleepwalking through life? And are we ending up in these destinations that feel like dead ends where we're having to call out to God, and we're getting to these places that we don't want to be because we're not seeing and we're not fully aware of what's going on around us and where we're going. So what I want us to look to Jesus today as the one who brings sight, not only physical sight in this miracle, but the one who brings spiritual sight and emotional sight to us so that we can go through life, not sleepwalking, not missing all the stuff that's going on around us, but really truly perceiving the deeper work of the Spirit. So Jesus stated that his role in coming into the earth was to be the light of the world. We see that in the chapter before this one in John 8. In fact, he began his public ministry by reading out of the scroll of Isaiah, and he said this of himself in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. His whole purpose of coming into the world was to set us free and to be the light to us and to bring sight for the blind. And so we're looking at this miracle we're going to study today. It is a physical, tangible expression of that truth that Jesus is the light. He's the one that brings sight to the blind. But it's more than just an account of a physical healing. It's so that we would see and believe. John 20 is our core verse that we've been using for the study of the miracles of Jesus. Jesus performed many miracles, many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ. He is the anointed one, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. There's a reason that John recorded each one of these miracles that we've been studying. And the reason is that we would believe in Jesus. And so our invitation today, for those of you who are exploring Jesus and maybe you're new to him and you're listening in today and you're asking questions about him, our heart is that you would hear about and see the miracles of Jesus and that you would believe in him. And for those of us that have known and walked with Jesus, that we would see clearer, we would perceive more, our eyes would be open to the depth of who Jesus is, and that we would believe more and more. And so let's look at John chapter 9 if you want to open your Bibles there. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. This is Jesus. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered them, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, and no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. There's that repeated theme. After saying this, he spit on the ground, and he made some mud with the saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told the man, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And so the man went and he washed, and he came home seeing. And so this incredible miracle, a couple things that I just want to highlight for you really quickly. The religion of the day said if somebody was born blind, it's because they were cursed, something their parents did or something happened like that. And they also believed that the Messiah would be able to heal someone who was blind from birth. So that's one thing that is an undertone to this historical context. The other thing is that they believed that there was some medicinal value to saliva. So for him to put saliva on the man's eyes wasn't completely outside of his cultural context. For us, it's disgusting. We're like, what in the world was going on? But then the third thing I want you to notice in this is that Jesus made mud, which on Sabbath was not allowed. So this was a healing that took place on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is again bringing the religious people into confrontation with who he is. He's healing by breaking the Sabbath. And we've seen that, you guys, as we've studied all these different miracles in John, we've seen Jesus really walk right into the Sabbath and heal people and set people free and do those things. And so as we're going to paraphrase this next section of the scripture, it's a long section of scripture and we could spend a ton of time on it. But what happens is this man comes back and he's healed, and the neighbors go, is this the guy who was begging? Is this the man who was blind? And he says, it was me. I was that man. It wasn't not someone who just looked like me. And so they bring him before the Pharisees, the religious council of the day. And the Pharisees question him, and they begin to question him, how did this happen? What happened? And he tells them the story. Jesus came, he made mud, stuck it on my face, told me to go wash in this pool. I washed, I came back, I could see. And so they're not believing. They're incredulous that this could happen. And so they believe Jesus is a sinner. They believe this man is a sinner. They believe that God doesn't listen to sinners. So how could this even happen? And so they're trying to figure all of this out. So they send for the man's parents to confirm that he was really born blind. So the parents come in, they say, yep, that's our son. He was really born blind. And that's all we're going to tell you. If you want to ask more questions, you can ask him. Because the Pharisees were already ticked off at this point. So they were casting people out of the temple because of their following Jesus. And so the parents were taking the safe route to say, here's what we know. It was our son. He was born blind. Now he can see. Ask him some more questions. So the Pharisees bring this guy back in. And so that picks us up in verse 24. A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they say. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, speaking of Jesus, he replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know is that I was blind, but now I see. In verse 26, then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, I've told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? So this is now, we're moving into the realm of straight sarcasm from this guy who just keeps getting asked these questions. Do you guys want to be his disciples as well? And then they hurled insults at him and they said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are the disciples of Moses. And so they began, because he's confronting them and because he's messing with them, they lose their temper. And this is something that I find often within religion, is that it's very welcomed on the outside and it's all this appearance, but when it's pushed, what comes out is often ugly. What comes out is often derogatory. What comes out is often attacking. And so we have to be careful to recognize that religion is able to stay passive and perfect looking on the outside, but when pushed, this stuff breaks out of them. You are this fellow's disciples. They go on to say, we're the disciples of Moses, which is putting in contrast the old covenant and the new covenant that Jesus is coming to bring. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for Jesus, as for this fellow, they're not even saying who he is. We don't even know where he comes from. And so the man answered them, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. That's what he's been taught. That's what religion has taught. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a blind man. That's a reference to the messianic miracle that they were waiting as one of the signs that the Messiah had come, is that he would open the eyes of someone who was born blind. Verse 33, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And then they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. And so Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. He's had this amazing encounter with this guy. He's healed him. And he hears that the religious leaders have thrown him out. And so he goes and he finds him. And when he found him, he said this, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he says, who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. And Jesus said, verse 37, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. And then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. In the original language, that term worshiped him is actually indicating that he got down on his knees and he gave glory to Jesus. And Jesus said, for judgment I've come into this world so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind. That is a direct word for the Pharisees who are standing there and listening to this. Those who are blind know that they need the Messiah. Those who think that they see are going to miss him entirely. So the question in this story is, who was truly blind? The religious people are going through life thinking that they have sight and they are blind. And they are going through the motions and they are sleepwalking, to refer to the story that I told at the beginning, ending up in these destinations that they aren't intending to go, but they're missing it. And so this man's blindness was lifted and he believed and he worshiped. The righteous, they continued to sleepwalk. They continued to revert back to systems and to judgments, to who has sinned and how come they've sinned and what can God do, and they completely missed Jesus. So let's circle back quickly to the beginning of the passage and look at a couple things in this story, and then we'll wrap up with some application and some encouragement for you guys today. In verse 2 and 3, John 9, verse 2 and 3, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born this way? And Jesus answered, as we read, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And I love this, is that Jesus doesn't rebuke them for asking. Asking these types of questions is completely fine with Jesus. So he loves our questions and he loves their questions. The problem is that Jesus doesn't always answer our questions. He didn't answer their question. He just sidestepped it and he pointed it in a completely different direction. And instead of answering their question, of why, he actually turned it into what was the possibility that could take place. This has happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. The Pharisees, even as this story unfolds, they were constantly stuck in the why and the how and what has taken place, and they don't get to partake in this beautiful miracle that takes place. But the disciples and this man who asked why, they get to partake in this, and it becomes this invitation. And so we understand, we see that not all their questions get answered. And sometimes those questions get sidestepped, and I think we're experiencing that a little bit in our own lives right now. We want to know, why is this? What's going on here? We're trying to figure everything out because we feel out of control. We feel out of control. We want to figure everything out. We begin to ask why. But what we should really be doing is focusing on the reality of not everything has to have a why, but everything does have a solution in Jesus, a supernatural opportunity. When we're worried about the why, we can start to assign guilt or blame, or this is happening because of this, and it's because of this, and because of this, and we completely begin to distance ourselves from the very people that we should be reaching out to, or from the solutions, the miraculous solutions that could be taking place. And sometimes if I'm asking why all the time, it's actually indicating a place in my heart where I want to understand more than I want to be formed by the tension of meeting God in the unknown. And so what we're being invited into is that place of him saying, there is a miracle solution in every situation that you're facing. And whether it's blindness or whether it's something else, I want us to understand that Jesus is saying, I'm not here to assign blame, and I'm not here to say it's because of this or because of this or because of this. I'm here to show you miraculous solutions. So we have to be able to say, we have to lay down our addiction to knowing everything. We have to lay down our addiction to control and having everything figured out, and just say, what are you revealing to me in this place? What is the miracle? What is the work that you want to do in this time? So from that little verse, I just have a challenge for you and then an encouragement. The challenge is this. Let's be less focused on why and on figuring everything out, and let's be more focused on the opportunity that is before us for God to show up. Where you see problems that need to be figured out, Jesus is looking and bringing solutions that need to be released. So my encouragement is that our blindness, just like this man, we can find a commonality in this man's story. We're all born blind. He was born blind. We are all born spiritually blind, but we're also every single one of us individually are dealing with so many different things. Your blindness, the loss, the grief, the struggle, the fear, your story, that place that you're asking God, why? God, why? Why is this happening? Why is this taking place? Why did this happen? That place of why in your life is an opportunity for God's glory to be shown. Now in John 9:7, go, he told them, wash in the pool of Siloam. And the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. I love this, is that he put mud on the blind man's eyes, and then he told him to walk. I don't know how far it was, but he wasn't right by it, and so he had to walk on his own. Maybe somebody helped him, but the sense of Jesus just saying, go and do this thing. It wasn't this instantaneous healing where Jesus did it and it was finished. He actually had him participate by faith to activate something in that responsibility of stewarding that miracle. And so he had this invitation to walk to this pool and to go wash. There's a partnership, a willingness, a responsibility that the man had to act in faith. And that accomplished, or it completed, the healing that Jesus had started. And so from that, I want to challenge you one thing, and I want to encourage you one thing. The challenge is this: not all the work that Jesus is doing in your life is going to be sitting in front of him and instantly taken care of. It's not that you or I are going to be passive spectators to the things that God is doing. We have to be willing to step in and hear what he's asking us to do and move forward in faith. And so the encouragement is just that. When he instructs you through his word or through a personal, still small voice to your inner ear that he says, I want you to do this. I want you to move in this way. I want you to participate in this way, that you would be quick to obey. because you never know what listening and obeying that instruction that Jesus is giving you is going to release in your life. But I am believing, and this is what Kate and I are believing for, is that in this current season, that many of you are going to be walking out of it having had personal encounters with Jesus that have reformed you and your family and your future and your friendships and your school and your marriages and your family, and that you have been shaped into new spheres of influence and formed into places of authority because you chose to listen and in faith to go to the places that Jesus was telling you to go, and that in going that you were able to come back with fresh sight and with new revelation, and that you are able to now partner with Jesus in proclaiming his gospel and bringing light to the darkness because of the formation that's taking place in you as you've met with Jesus. And he's performing a miracle in your life, but there's these small acts of faith that you get to participate in, and you get to walk in obedience that craft a heart and a life that is a message of God's glory and of his purpose and of his miracles for you and for those around you. And then you get to be like this guy in John 9 when he's standing before the Pharisees and they keep peppering him and peppering him. What happened? How did this happen? What's going on? He said, one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. I don't have it all figured out. I can't explain everything that Jesus did in us and through us, around us, in our family, in our business, in our sphere of influence. I can't explain it all, but one thing I do know is that this is what Jesus has done. We don't have to understand it all, but we do have to be available, and we have to be willing to walk in that still small voice, those obedience points that activate when we move in faith. You won't be able to understand. We can't explain it to everybody, but the testimony will be Jesus met me. And he led me. He instructed me to do these things. And when I did them, this is the miracle that came from that. So there's a lot more, obviously, to this passage that we could go into. It's a long passage of Scripture, and I encourage you to study it more this week and keep reading it. I could probably teach, I know in the notes that I created, I could teach for several weeks just on this passage because there's so much really rich stuff in the interactions that Jesus had with the Pharisees and the different things that took place. But I want us to be able to see is that the religious were blinded by pride and by their rules and by their regulations, and they weren't able to participate in this glory being shown, God's glory and purposes being shown through this miracle. They were standing back from it, but this man who was blind was able to see it. So who was really blind? When are we like the disciples in this passage? We're like the disciples when we trust that our relationship with Jesus is okay for us to have curiosity and ask questions and go, Jesus, what about this? And what about this? And we don't feel guilt and shame to bring these things to him. He doesn't shut down our questions and he doesn't choke them out before we even have a chance to ask them. He participates with us in those things. But we have to remember that we are like the disciples when we're asking questions, but just like the disciples in this passage, you're not going to get every single question answered the way that you expect or the way that you desire. But what we do know from this interaction with the disciples is that every situation that we encounter is an opportunity for God's presence and power to be made known. Not only in you personally, but as you're walking around and moving about through life, when you see things that people are dealing with, those are opportunities, not for you to figure out why that's happening, but to figure out what is God doing in it. When are we like the Pharisees? In this story, we're like the Pharisees when we're prideful, when we become unteachable, when we don't allow Jesus to show up for us or through us or show up for others in us in ways that are outside our box. When we have everything so regulated and regimented and figured out, when we are so convinced that our understanding of who Jesus is and how he works is the final say on everything, we pull ourselves back from the situations, and it constricts the ability for us to see him and move with him in the things that he's doing. And when are we like the blind man? We're like the blind man when we are brought to belief. I love the story because of his response. It wasn't just head knowledge. Who is the Son of Man? I want to believe in him. It took him beyond just head knowledge to getting down on his knees before Jesus and worshiping him. We're like this blind man who had his life changed by an encounter with Jesus when our heart is torn open and we express that in a life laid down before Jesus, when it goes beyond our head all the way to our heart. Have you seen Jesus clearly? Have you seen who he is? Have you experienced what he does for us in setting us right and setting us free? Have you taken it beyond your intellect all the way to your heart? Are you a worshiper of Jesus to get down on your knees in your life before Him and lay your life down and say, Lord, I believe, and worship. That's when we're like this man who had his life changed, who was really blind. And who in this story, like my son Ezra, is sleepwalking with their eyes open but heading towards dead ends. Here's the thing. We are not a sleepwalking people. We are not a sleepwalking church. We carry and we release light. John 9:4, the last verse I'll look at in this passage. As long as it is day, Jesus said, we must do the works of Him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Notice that Jesus uses the word we, and it includes His disciples, and by extension, it includes you, and it includes me. After His death, His disciples, and now us, would be the light of the world. This is an invitation and it's an empowerment to us to carry that light into darkness. As we look at next Sunday is Pentecost Sunday. And I want you to, really quick historical context for this passage is that when you study it, you see that what's happening around this time of this miracle of this man being born blind and being healed by Jesus is the Festival of Lights. And the Festival of Lights in Jerusalem is they would have these giant bonfires around the city that they would hold up and they would light them, and it would light up the city at night. Fire was equated to light in that time. That was the way that they would be able to light their houses and light their way. And in this particular festival, they would light up the night. And so Jesus is performing this miracle and all of these declarations about the light and how He is the light in the midst of this festival of lights. And so you have this picture of flame equaling light. And as we look at Pentecost, remember Acts chapter 2, when the day of Pentecost came, all the disciples were together in one room, in the upper room. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house because they were sitting where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire come and separate and came to rest on each person. That fire is light. So what they saw was that the light that Jesus is saying, I am the light of the world, that we are at work. As long as there's opportunity, we are at work. And that by extension, His disciples and now us are those that carry the light of the world. And that we see that on the day of Pentecost when the Spirit was poured out. It wasn't just fire, it was light. That tongues of light came and rested on each one of us. We carry that light. We are people of light, not people of blindness, spiritual blindness, emotional blindness, or physical blindness. We are people who see Jesus as He is and carry His light. And that's the invitation that we have in reading John 9 and studying the miracles, is that He is calling us to be people who release miracles as well. Matthew 5, you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but put it on a lampstand and gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works, that they may see the glory, like He talked about with healing this man, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So my challenge to you as we study this passage and as we wrap up today is that you have a position, you have a place. God has placed you to be able to bring light to those around you. You are an extension of Jesus' ministry. We're not caught up in the why, we're caught up in how is God going to use this situation right in front of me to glorify Him and to make Jesus known. And that we do that knowing that we have the Spirit, the light in us, that we're carrying it and we're releasing it. Be a light to your world. Be someone who releases hope and truth and joy. Not someone who stirs up fear or anxiety or lives in places of lack. Be someone who says, I am drawing on the resources of heaven to bring glory to Jesus and to make Him known. So that just like in John 20, that people will look at our lives and say, I believe in Jesus because of who He is to you and who He is through you. We love you guys. Thank you for hanging out with us this morning. Have an incredible day.
You've brought me to the end of myself, and this has been the longest road. perfect love comes rushing, and all the lies and screamed inside go silent. The moment you begin, I am letting go. I am letting go. I am letting go. Falling into I'm letting go. I am letting go. I am letting go. Falling into and you remind me of things forgotten. You unwind me until I'm totally undone. And with your arms around me, there is no match for your love. Now you've won me. And you remind me of things forgotten. You unwind me until I'm totally undone. And with your